Success needs patience. A younger man who comes from a poor family struggled to survive
I
on
remember
the
very
street.
well the first time I noticed the man called Otim, because his story did not begin with riches, comfort, or easy life, but instead it began in a small corner of Nigeria where life was very hard and every single day was a struggle for many families who lived there. I grew up around that same place, and that is why I am able to tell this story clearly, because I saw many of the things with my own eyes, and I watched how life slowly shaped the man Otim later became. Otim was born into a very poor family that lived in a tiny house made from old wood and rusty iron sheets that made loud sounds whenever the wind blew at night, and even though the house was small and simple, it was the only place they could call home. And I remember walking past that house many times and seeing Otim sitting outside with his family, and it was easy for anyone to see that life was not kind to them, because there were many days when the cooking pot stayed empty and the smell of food never came out of that house. His parents were good people who tried their best to care for their children, but the truth was that they did not have much, and the little they had was never enough to make life comfortable. Sometimes they worked very hard from morning until evening, yet they still returned home with almost nothing. And on those days, the whole family simply sat quietly together and hoped that tomorrow would bring something better. As Otim grew older, I began to notice something different about him that many other children around us did not have, because while other children were only thinking about playing and running around, Otim spent a lot of time watching the world around him very carefully. I often saw him sitting by the roadside or near the small market, quietly looking at how people talked, how traders sold their goods, and how travelers came and went carrying different things. Even though Otim was still young, it was easy for me to see that his mind was always busy thinking about many things, because his eyes moved from one place to another as if he was trying to understand how the whole world worked. Many people did not notice this about him, but I did. And that is why I still remember those early days very clearly. Life in that area was not easy at all, and many families struggled just like Otim's family did. But Otim's situation was especially difficult because there were many days when he walked around the streets with an empty stomach, hoping that somehow he might find a small piece of food or a kind person willing to share something with him. I remember seeing him walking slowly through the dusty streets, greeting people politely, and sometimes helping carry small things for traders in the market just so he could earn a little coin or receive a small meal. Even though hunger and hardship followed him almost every day, Otim did not behave like someone who had lost hope in life, because he always kept observing, learning, and thinking about everything around him. I noticed that whenever he helped someone or spoke with someone older than him, he listened very carefully, as if every word he heard was an important lesson he wanted to keep inside his mind. Those early days were very hard for Otim and his family, and many people who saw him then could never imagine that the quiet boy walking through the streets with worn clothes and tired feet would one day become a man whose name people would talk about with respect. And as I continued watching Otim move through those difficult days while quietly studying the world around him, I slowly began to realize that the streets themselves were becoming his classroom. Because every corner, every trader, and every passerby seemed to be teaching him something new about life without even knowing it. And it was during those long days of walking through the busy streets that Otim's sharp mind slowly began to show itself in ways that people around him were just starting to notice. As I continued watching Otim during those days, when the streets were slowly becoming his classroom, I began to notice more clearly how he was learning many things from simply observing the people and activities around him. Because every morning, when the sun rose over the dusty roads of our town, Otim was already awake and moving through the streets with quiet determination, even though his clothes were simple and his stomach was often empty. I remember many mornings when I saw him standing near the small market where traders gathered with baskets of tomatoes, peppers, fruits, and many other things, and while other boys of his age were running around playing games, Otim stood nearby, carefully watching how the traders spoke to customers, how they arranged their goods, and how they convinced people. Sometimes he would move closer just to hear the conversations, and I could see from his face that he was thinking deeply about everything he was seeing and hearing. Life on the streets was not easy for Otim at all, because the streets can be a very harsh place for someone who has almost nothing, yet he never allowed the hardship to break his spirit. I often saw him offering to help traders carry baskets, sweep the front of small shops, or run small errands for people who needed help. And even though the reward was often just a small coin or a piece of bread, Otim always accepted it with gratitude because every little thing meant something to him. What surprised many people was the way Otim spoke and behaved, because even though he was poor and young, he carried himself with respect and patience. Whenever he greeted someone, he did it politely, and whenever someone spoke to him, he listened carefully, as if their words were very important. Because of this, some traders began to trust him and allowed him to help them with small tasks around their stalls. I remember one old trader who sold roasted corn by the roadside, and many times I saw Otim standing beside him, helping arrange the corn neatly while the trader served customers. The old man once laughed gently and said that Otim had the eyes of someone who notices everything, because while he worked, he also observed how people chose what they wanted to buy and how they reacted to different prices. Otim's sharp mind began to show itself in small ways that people slowly started noticing, because he remembered many things that others forgot. If someone asked him to deliver a message or carry something to a nearby place, he did it quickly and correctly without making mistakes. When traders discussed prices or talked about where certain goods came from, Otim listened closely and stored those ideas in his mind, as if he was collecting pieces of knowledge that might become useful one day. Even though his life was still full of hardship and uncertainty, Otim never stopped learning from the streets around him, because he understood that every day was teaching him something valuable about how the world worked. I often saw him sitting quietly at the edge of the market in the evening, watching the traders pack their goods while the sun slowly disappeared behind the buildings. And during those quiet moments, it always looked like he was thinking deeply about his future. As days turned into weeks, and weeks slowly became months, Otim continued walking through the same streets, helping people, observing everything, and slowly building a mind that understood far more than most people expected from a boy in his situation. And while many people simply saw a poor young boy moving through the market each day, I began to realize that inside his mind, a powerful decision was slowly forming, because all the things he had seen and learned were quietly pushing him toward a moment when he would finally decide what kind of life he truly wanted to live. As I continued seeing Otim walk through the same busy streets every day while learning from everything around him, I slowly began to notice that something deeper was happening inside his mind, because the boy who once only moved around the market looking for small tasks was now spending more time thinking quietly about his future and the kind of life he truly wanted to live. I remember one evening very clearly when the sun was slowly going down and the market was beginning to close, because traders were packing their goods and people were returning to their homes after a long day of work. That evening, I saw Otim sitting alone near the edge of the road where the dust from the day's movement had finally started settling. And he was looking at the traders, counting their money and arranging their things before leaving. I stood not too far away, watching him, and I could see from the way he looked at them that his mind was working deeply. At that moment, I realized that Otim was not simply watching the traders like he used to do before, but he was now thinking carefully about how those people had built their lives and how they managed to survive through hard work every day. I could almost see the questions moving inside his head, because he watched how some traders worked patiently with their customers, how others organized their goods carefully, and how the ones who worked with honesty were the ones who always seemed to have more people coming to buy from them. That evening, Otim remained there longer than usual, quietly thinking as the market slowly became empty and the sounds of the day faded away. When the last trader finally left, Otim stood up slowly and looked down the long road that stretched through our town. And I remember feeling that something important had just happened inside him, even though he had not spoken a single word. I began to notice a change in the way Otim behaved, because the boy who once moved around the streets just trying to survive now carried himself with a stronger sense of purpose. Whenever he helped someone carry goods or run errands, he did the work with even more focus and seriousness, as if every small task was preparing him for something greater that he had already decided in his heart. One afternoon, I finally heard him speak about what he had been thinking, because he was helping an older man arrange sacks of grain near a small shop when the man jokingly asked him why he always looked so serious while working. Otim smiled gently and said that he had spent many years watching people and learning from the streets, and now he had made a promise to himself that he would no longer live his life only struggling from day to day. He explained in a calm and thoughtful voice that even though he came from a poor family and life had been very difficult for him, he believed that the mind a person carries inside their head is more powerful than the situation they are born into. Otim said that he had decided he would use his sharp mind, his patience, and his willingness to work hard in order to change his future step by step. The old man looked at him with surprise, because such words sounded very wise, coming from someone so young. But Otim simply continued working quietly, as if the promise he had made to himself was already guiding every action he took. From that moment, I understood that Otim was no longer just a boy surviving on the streets, because something stronger had taken root inside him. And as the days continued passing, and Otim carried his new determination everywhere he went, it soon became clear that the promise he had made to himself was about to lead him toward the very first opportunity that would begin changing the direction of his life. As the days continued passing after Otim had made that quiet but powerful promise to himself, I began to notice that he moved through the streets with even greater focus than before, because every small task he did now seemed to carry a deeper meaning for him. It was no longer just about finding something to eat for the day, but about proving to himself that hard work and patience could slowly change the direction of his life. One bright morning, when the market was already busy with people buying and selling different goods, I saw Otim walking carefully between the stalls, just like he always did, greeting people politely and offering help wherever he could. The air was filled with many sounds: traders calling customers, people discussing prices, and the movement of carts and baskets everywhere. In the middle of all that activity, Otim continued helping different people with the same calm attitude he had always shown. Not far from the center of the market, there was a trader who sold bags of rice, beans, and other grains, and that trader had been watching Otim for a long time without Otim even realizing it. The trader had noticed how Otim worked honestly whenever he helped people carry things, and how he never complained, even when the work was tiring. That morning, the trader called Otim closer and asked him if he would be willing to help organize some sacks of grain that had just been delivered. Otim immediately agreed with a respectful smile, because he was always ready to work whenever an opportunity appeared. The trader showed him where the sacks needed to be arranged and explained how they should be placed carefully so that customers could easily see them. Otim listened closely to every instruction, nodding his head as he paid attention to each detail. I watched him begin the work with great care, lifting and arranging the sacks one by one while making sure everything was placed neatly and properly. Even though the work was heavy and the sun above the market was very warm that day, Otim did not rush through the task or show any sign of frustration. Instead, he continued working steadily, wiping the dust from the sacks and lining them up in a way that made the trader's stall look more organized than it had ever been before. When customers began arriving, the trader noticed something interesting, because the neat arrangement of the sacks made it easier for people to see the goods clearly, and many customers started stopping by the stall. Otim quietly helped guide some of them toward the items they were looking for, while the trader The whole handled the place sales. suddenly felt more active and welcoming, and the trader realized that the young boy helping him was not only hardworking, but also very thoughtful. By the time the sun started moving lower in the sky and the busy morning slowed down, the trader looked around his stall with satisfaction, and then turned to Otim with a smile that showed clear appreciation. He thanked Otim for the effort and handed him a small payment along with some food. But what mattered even more was the way the trader spoke to him afterward. The trader told Otim that he had been observing him for many days and had come to respect the honesty and patience he showed while working in the market. He then explained that if Otim was willing, he could return the next day and help again with organizing goods and assisting customers whenever the market was busy. I remember the quiet joy that appeared on Otim's face at that moment. Because even though the opportunity seemed small to others, to him it was something very important. It was the first time someone had trusted him with regular work instead of just a quick task here and there. Otim thanked the trader politely and promised that he would return early the next morning, ready to work. As he walked away from the stall, carrying the small reward he had earned that day, I could clearly see that the promise he had made to himself was already beginning to open new doors for him, and that simple opportunity in the market was about to become the place where Otim would start learning lessons that would slowly shape the path toward his future. As I watched Otim walk away from the trader's stall that evening with quiet happiness in his eyes, I could tell that something meaningful had begun for him. Because that small opportunity was not just another task for the day, but the beginning of a new chapter in his life. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen above the roofs of the town, I already saw Otim walking quickly toward the market with a determined look on his face, ready to return to the stall where the trader had asked him to help. When he arrived, the trader greeted him warmly and showed him the work that needed to be done that day. There were new sacks of grain to arrange, baskets to place neatly, and customers who would soon begin arriving to buy what they needed for their homes. Otim listened carefully to every instruction, just as he had done the day before, and then he began working with the same patience and careful attention that had impressed the trader earlier. Day after day, Otim returned to that stall, and each day he learned something new about how the market worked and how people managed their small businesses. I often saw him watching the trader while he spoke with customers, noticing how he explained the quality of the grains and how he greeted people kindly so they would feel welcome at his stall. Otim did not only help with the physical work of lifting and arranging goods, but he also paid close attention to the conversations and decisions that happened during the day. Sometimes the trader would explain small things to him, such as how to keep goods clean, how to count money carefully, and how to treat customers with respect so they would trust the stall and return again in the future. Otim listened to these lessons with great interest, storing each one carefully in his mind, as if he was collecting pieces of knowledge that would one day become very valuable. Even when the work was tiring and the sun felt strong over the market, Otim never showed signs of giving up or losing focus. Instead, he continued helping with a calm attitude, always making sure that everything around the stall looked neat and welcoming. Many customers began noticing the hard-working boy who assisted the trader, and some of them even greeted him kindly when they arrived. As weeks slowly turned into months, Otim's confidence began to grow, along with his understanding of how trade worked. The trader trusted him more and more, sometimes allowing him to watch the stall for a short time while he stepped away to handle other things in the market. During those moments, Otim treated the responsibility very seriously, making sure everything remained in order until the trader returned. I remember one afternoon when the market was especially busy and customers were arriving quickly from different directions. Otim helped guide them politely, answering simple questions and showing them where the different sacks were placed. The trader later smiled proudly and told him that his calm and respectful way of speaking made customers feel comfortable. Through all these experiences, Otim was not only working, but also growing in knowledge and understanding, because every day in the market taught him something new about patience, honesty, and the value of effort. The same streets that once only offered him hardship were now slowly becoming the place where his future was being shaped. And as Otim continued learning and improving with each passing day, it became clear to me that the quiet lessons he was gathering in that busy market would soon guide him toward bigger steps that would begin changing his life in ways many people around us had never imagined. As the months continued passing, and Otim kept learning more and more in the busy market, I began to notice that he was no longer the same boy who had once wandered the streets simply trying to survive each day. The quiet lessons he had gathered from watching traders, listening carefully to conversations, and working patiently beside the grain seller were slowly shaping him into someone who understood much more about life and trade than most people expected. Every morning, Otim still arrived early at the market, often before many traders had even finished setting up their stalls. He would begin by cleaning the area around the stall, arranging the sacks neatly and making sure everything looked welcoming for the customers who would soon arrive. But now, something else had changed as well, because the trader who had first given him the opportunity had begun trusting him with more responsibilities. Sometimes the trader allowed Otim to help measure the grains when customers made purchases, and other times he asked him to keep careful watch over the stall while he stepped away for a short time. Otim always handled these responsibilities with great care because he understood that trust was something very valuable and that it must never be broken. As I watched him during those days, I could clearly see that Otim's sharp mind was continuing to grow stronger. He remembered which customers visited often, he understood which goods sold quickly, and he noticed the small details that made the stall successful. While working, he also began asking thoughtful questions, wanting to understand where the grains came from, how they were transported, and how traders decided the prices they offered. The trader was pleased to see Otim's curiosity and willingness to learn, so he sometimes explained things to him patiently, showing him how business decisions were made and why honesty and fairness were important when dealing with people. Otim listened carefully to every explanation, just as he had always done since the days when the streets were his only classroom. Years slowly passed in this way, and during that time, Otim continued saving the small earnings he received from his work. He lived simply and avoided wasting what little he had, because he believed that every small step forward mattered. Many people in the market began recognizing him not just as a helper, but as a young man who worked with dedication and wisdom. One day, something important happened that I still remember clearly, because after many years of hard work and careful saving, Otim was finally able to begin a small trade of his own. With the money he had patiently gathered, he bought a small amount of goods to sell, and he placed them neatly in a modest space near the same market where he had once walked around as a hungry boy. At first, the business was very small and the profits were not large, but Otim did not allow that to discourage him. Instead, he continued using the lessons he had learned over the years, treating customers with kindness, organizing his goods carefully, and always remaining honest in every transaction he made. Slowly but steadily, people began trusting him, just as they had trusted the trader who had once guided him. Customers returned again and again because they appreciated the respectful way Otim treated them. As time moved forward, his small trade grew larger, and the modest stall he once managed began turning into a successful business. I often stood nearby watching all of this unfold, and it amazed me to see how the boy who once walked the streets searching for food had now become a respected trader whose hard work, his journey had not been quick or easy, but step by step, his patience and determination had carried him far beyond the struggles of his early life. And as Otim's success continued growing and his name slowly became known among many traders in the town, I also began to notice something else about him, because even though his life was changing for the better, he never forgot the difficult days he had once faced on those same streets where his journey had begun. As I continued watching Otim's life change over the years, I also noticed something very special about him that many people admired deeply, because even though his business was growing and his life was becoming more comfortable, he never allowed success to erase the memories of where he had come from. I still remember the dusty streets where I had first seen him, walking with empty hands and a tired face, and every time I looked at him now, I could clearly see that those early days were still alive in his heart. Otim's business continued growing slowly but steadily, and the small stall he had first started with patience and courage eventually became a place where many customers came daily. Traders around the market began speaking of him with respect because they knew that everything he had achieved came from honest work and careful learning. People trusted him not only because he sold good goods, but also because of the way he treated everyone with kindness and fairness. Even though he was now able to live a better life than before, Otim remained humble in his behavior, and that is something I always admired about him. I often saw him walking through the same streets where he once searched for small jobs, greeting people warmly and speaking with the same calm voice he had always used. Many people who knew his story looked at him with admiration because they understood how far he had come. What touched my heart the most was the way Otim began helping others who were facing the same struggles he had once faced. Whenever he saw young boys wandering around the market, looking for small work or hoping to earn something to eat, he did not ignore them. Instead, he often called them closer and gave them small tasks to do around his business so they could earn something honestly. I remember seeing him teaching some of them how to arrange goods neatly, how to speak politely to customers, and how to work with patience, even when the day felt long and tiring. Sometimes he shared food with them or offered advice that encouraged them not to lose hope, even when life felt difficult. When people asked him why he cared so much about helping others, Otim usually smiled gently and explained that he had once been in the same situation and understood how important it was for someone to believe in you when you had very little. He said that the kindness and opportunities he received when he was young had helped shape his future, and now he wanted to pass that same kindness forward. As the years continued moving forward, Otim became known not only as a successful trader, but also as a man whose life carried a powerful lesson for everyone who heard his story. Whenever I think about him, I always remember the long journey I witnessed with my own eyes, beginning with the quiet boy who studied the streets carefully and ending with the wise man who used his success to lift others. That is why, whenever people ask me how Otim became the man he is today, I always tell them that his story is not only about becoming rich, but about the power of patience, learning, and hard work. I saw him begin with almost nothing except a sharp mind and a determined heart, and step by step, he turned those simple things into a life that inspired many people around him. And even now, whenever I pass through the same market where his journey truly began, I still remember those early days and smile quietly to myself, because I know that the streets that once tested Otim's strength also became the place where his courage and wisdom slowly built the future he had once only dreamed about.